There's this cliche or idea or joke that if you are in a job interview and the person interviewing you says, "Tell me a weakness of yours," that you should never say, "Oh, well, my problem is that I'm just a bit too much of a perfectionist," because it sounds like humble bragging. And while it's true that you shouldn't say that in a job interview, it does sound bad in a job interview, it is also true that there are problems to being a perfectionist. I say this as someone who is a perfectionist. Now, there are upsides to being a perfectionist, but there are certainly downsides as well. Over the last however many years, when I think about the various things that I've attempted, a lot of the more successful ones were actually things that I did abandoning my degree of perfectionism. It was the things where I decided not to try to achieve that level of perfectionism that seemed to do quite well. And so this has gotten me thinking about the flaws and the disadvantages that come with perfectionism. A good example of perfectionism failing is actually in audiobook reading. I've done a certain amount of audiobook reading for my own work, on the subject of trolls, and for various short stories I've done. And this is somewhere where perfectionism really fails, because if you're going through a recording of some part of the book, and you're reading a certain line, you try to read that line, and of course you're listening to yourself as you read it, and you're trying to judge, is that how you wanted to do it? And you listen to yourself and you think, actually that's not quite how I wanted to read that line. So you stop and you go back and you do it again. And then the second take is also not quite how you wanted to do it. And then the third take and the fourth take. And it's by about take 6, 7 or 8 that finally you've got one that you're satisfied with. And then you carry on, and then very shortly later in the next paragraph, the same thing will happen again, and there'll be another line which just isn't satisfactory. So it's just not quite what you wanted it to be. So you record it again. And of course this creates a huge problem when it comes to editing, because now every few minutes, or more frequently than that, several times a minute, you've got multiple takes that you have to sift through and decide which one is the best one. Hopefully it's the last one. It isn't always. And you've got to listen to all of them over and over again, make sure the one you want is the one you get. But then that causes another problem, because by the time you did take 6, 7 or 8, you've sort of forgotten how you read the line before it. And so this take of that line, which finally seems to be perfect, actually now doesn't match up to what went before. And the line before, it doesn't flow. And so now you've got to go back and just do a whole new recording, re-record both of those lines, that whole paragraph again together, just to try and get the whole thing to flow. So the whole thing was a waste of time, doing all of those multiple takes. You put all of that effort in to try to be perfect, to try and get it exactly how you want, and in the end it goes nowhere. You just have to redo it all again. And this is basically what's happened every time I've tried to record an audiobook, except perhaps more recently, is I just spend ages and ages trying to get it perfect, and the result is not perfect. It's not quite what I was hoping it to be. Just have to do it again and again. So you waste a lot of time, and you don't necessarily make progress as fast or as well as you'd like. There are upsides to being a perfectionist. One area where it's very useful is in book formatting, because book formatting is just about looking at every single page of a book and making sure that every letter form, every line is in the right place, making sure all of the spacing is correct. Being a perfectionist really helps with that. And there's a number of other activities where it's quite useful, and I have put it to good use over the years. But perfectionism is, in a sense, a kind of risk aversion. And there are certain activities or certain projects or certain things you might try to do where actually being risk averse is a real detriment to doing that thing, or to doing it well, or to being successful at it. In those things, perfectionism has over the years limited things that I've done. I don't do New Year's resolutions as such. I do plan out the things I want to do in a year, but they're not quite the same as New Year's resolutions. But something I suppose I am intending to do this year is to be a bit less of a perfectionist in some things, and to be a little bit more of a risk taker in some things. Not everything. There are certain things for which I would always want to be a perfectionist. My writing is one of those things. And it's quite easy to be a perfectionist when it comes to writing, because writing is so editable, text is so editable. But for other things, I'm hoping this year to try to be just a bit more of a risk taker, just to try more things, to experiment with more things, to see where that gets me. But what do you think? Are you a perfectionist? Do you think most writers are perfectionists? I have a suspicion that they might be. Are there other ways in which perfectionism is a detriment to the things one tries to do? That's all I have for today.